Hey guys, this is Alex, and this is the 1981 DeLorean. Today, I'm going to be working on one of the most common issues that happens with this car, and that is the speedometer issues. If you have a bouncy needle or a speedometer that just stopped working, or in my case, a clicking sound coming from the driver's side wheel, it is likely that there's a problem with the speedometer mechanism. The speedometer mechanism on this car is driven by something called the angle drive, and the angle drive is located behind the wheel. It has a cable that is connected directly to the dash, and that mechanically turns the speedometer. DMC Houston sells a kit to address these issues. The kit can also be bought in separate components, but I find it convenient to be able to buy a kit that comes with everything that I need. So let's see how it goes. The angle drive is located behind the driver's side wheel. Once I got the wheel off, I was able to expose the dust cup. Normally, the dust cup comes off very easily. It's just a matter of pulling it straight out. However, my cable got so hot that it melted into the dust cup, forcing me to break the dust cup just to get it off and be able to access the axle nut. Once I finally got it off, I loosened up the axle nut using an impact gun. Moving to the back of the caliper, the first thing that I wanted to do was remove the speedometer cable. To remove the speedometer cable, I used channel lock pliers first to loosen the cable, and then I was able to remove by hand. Normally most people don't remove the tie rod end for an angle drive replacement. However, I wanted a lot of space in there, and it didn't take too long to disconnect the tie rod. With the nut removed, I simply separated the tie rod end by tapping it out with a rubber mallet. With the tie rod end disconnected, there is plenty of access now to remove the angle drive. The angle drive is removed with a 1 inch and 1/4 wrench. It was pretty hard, it was very tight on there. Once it was loosened, I was able to fully remove the angle drive by hand. Going back underneath the driver's side footwheel, I loosened the speedometer cable from the lambda counter, first using channel lock pliers and then using my fingers. Moving back to the outside of the car, the only thing that holds the cable now is this plastic grommet. With the old cable removed, I wanted to compare the old cable to the new DMCH cable. Some of the early DeLoreans had a cable that was way too long for the application. Mine happens to be a later DeLorean, so it has the correct length. The new cables from DMCH are of the correct length. The way that this works is that the angle drive is connected to this cable. Inside the angle drive there are gears and a flexible shaft. The shaft connects then to a dust cup. The dust cup in turn is turned by the wheel. The kit from DMCH comes with a cable, angle drive, and a new dust cap. While the new angle drive is ready to go, there is one thing that has to be transferred from the old angle drive, and that is the nut. This nut is held to the drive by a clip. The clip is retained inside of a groove that prevents the nut from coming off. In order to remove the nut from the old angle drive, I have to fish out the clip using a very small screwdriver or a very small pick. After struggling for many minutes, I was unable to find any clip inside of there. Turns out my angle drive nut had been glued in place. How did I get it apart? Well, what I ended up doing, I ended up tapping from the back using a screwdriver and a mallet. Eventually, the nut was freed loose from the angle drive. If you're planning to rebuild the angle drive, you gotta be careful not to damage it using this method. Once the nut is off, I cleaned it and prepared for reinstallation onto the new angle drive. To install the nut on the new angle drive is fairly straightforward. I removed the clip from the groove, and once the clip is removed, I was able to insert the nut into the new angle drive. With the nut inserted, I dropped the clip inside the nut, and I secured the clip to the groove using a screwdriver and a pick. Once the clip is secure inside the groove, it retains the nut in place. One thing that I noticed is that the angle drive can freely move and spin from the nut. My previously glued angle drive clearly was not able to move this freely. Going back to the car, unfortunately when I removed the angle drive, I noticed that I am missing a clip. The clip holds the speedometer cable away from the tire. This is important because the tire as spins can contact the speedometer cable and potentially damage that over time. Unfortunately, when I try to order the part from DMCH, it's out of stock. You might be able to find this part used on the internet or from the European suppliers, but I wanted to get my car running as soon as possible. Since I never seen one of these clips in real life, I didn't know the exact scale of it, so I used a picture that I found on the internet and took a rod of steel and bended that into the shape that I saw on the picture. My plan was to secure the clip to the caliper bracket like this. I drilled a hole and using a nut, washer and a bolt, I secured the clip to the caliper bracket. Here's the bracket installed. Looks pretty good, but we'll see at the end if it actually works or not. One thing that I wanted to do before installing the speedometer cable was to lubricate it. Now there are conflicting opinions on this. Some say that the cable is ready to go as installed, some recommend that you lubricate this. One thing that I didn't want to use is grease. The reason for it is as the cable turns, it can act like a screw, driving the grease up into the lambda counter or into another area that might not be desired. What they recommend you use for speedometer cables is dry graphite. The dry graphite is basically a powder that is suspended in an alcohol solution. When the graphite is sprayed into the cable, the alcohol evaporates, leaving the graphite behind. Once the graphite has dried, I reinserted the shaft back into the cable cover. I made sure that I reinserted the shaft in the correct orientation. The side that has the washer goes towards the lambda counter. Going back to the front of the car, I reinserted the speedometer cable back through the hole it came out. And here comes the fun part. This grommet is kind of tricky and frustrating. First I shoved one side in, and then using the screwdriver I pushed the remaining parts of it into the firewall. And I did that very carefully to avoid damaging or ripping the grommet as it is rubber. Once the grommet is secure, I went back inside the car and reconnected the cable back to the lambda counter. I reconnected the cable without using any pliers and just tightened by hand. I also lubricated the shaft that goes inside the stove axle. From the back of the stove axle, I fed the angle drive and tightened by hand. Going back to the front, I re-tightened the angle drive. Now this part is very critical. This holds the axle and in turn holds the wheel to the car, so here taking any shortcuts could be potentially fatal. I proceeded then to reconnect the tie rod. I always like to start the nuts by hand before using any kind of power tools or air tools. Once the nut was fully installed, I torqued the spec. Again, this is another part that's very critical. If this nut were to come off and the tie rod comes out, you will lose control of the car, so I wanted to make sure that I tightened this to the correct spec. I then inserted the cable through my homemade clip and connected it to the angle drive. I first started the angle drive nut by hand and then tightened with channel lock pliers. Next, I re-tightened the axle nut that I had previously loosened. First, I used an impact gun to get it nice and tight. The specification for the axle nut is 165 foot-pounds. Because I don't have a torque wrench that goes that high, I used a breaker bar to tighten as much as I could. I then proceeded to reinstall the dust cap. One thing I really like about the new DMCH dust cap is that it has a very nice press fit installation. The original dust cap for my DeLorean used to need to be shimmed. I used electrical tape every so often just to keep it from slipping off the wheel. I then reinstalled the tire and installed all the lug nuts. I first used an impact gun and then torqued by hand to specification. Here's a shot from underneath the car. I wanted to confirm that my homemade clip worked. And yes, sure enough, it did keep the cable away from the tire and away from any kind of pinch point that might hurt or damage the cable. So as you saw, this installation goes pretty smooth.
It doesn't require a lot of time, and the fact that DMC Houston put a kit together that you can just buy and get all the components you need makes it a big plus. The kit is not really expensive for what you get. You get the dust cup, you get the cable, you get the angle drive. I mean, really everything to get you going. Now, there are some interesting differences between the instructions that DMC Houston includes and the parts that you receive. The instructions have, for example, an angle drive that is being described as lubricated, or that you can lubricate. The angle drive that you receive from DMC Houston is sealed. There's no way to lubricate that angle drive. The original angle drive from the factory did have a provision for oiling or lubrication, but they still fail even with lubrication. So let's see how long the sealed angle drive from DMC Houston lasts. The cable itself was also high quality. I like that it was the right length, not the overly long one that would have caused issues. I did run into the problem with the broken clip, but as you saw, I Mickey Moused it with my own homemade clip. Now, that fix that I did for the clip is intended as a temporary solution. I do want to buy the original bracket once it becomes available. I'm a big fan of keeping the car fully restored to its most original condition as possible. So as soon as DMC Houston receives that part, or it's available from one of the European vendors, I'm gonna be going back in there and swapping that out. Besides that, I really recommend the kit, even if just to have, because if one of these things breaks down and you have a show or you have some kind of event that you were planning on going to, now you're dead in the water with that possible speedometer issue. All right, guys, well, this is it for this time. Talk to you guys later.